Hey everybody, Iron here, and yeah, all done with Nobody Wants to Die. Definitely enjoyed the game. I'm actually very pleased with how several of the things went with the game. I've got quite a few pointers here and there with it as well, and a few things to talk about. So without any further ado, let's just jump right in, shall we? All right, number one, game summary. Pretty simple and straightforward. Nobody Wants to Die is a first person interactive based game where you play as a noir detective named James Kara in a sci fi dystopian world of New York City in the year 2329, where you use advanced technology as you pursue. Now, section two, the team. The team behind this game is an indie studio called Critical Hit Games, and they were actually founded and located in Poland, Germany, with various individuals who actually worked on some AAA franchises that we know of. So that actually did kind of seem a bit interesting to me, which also kind of set my expectations for the game a little bit higher than most indie developers. But this game was actually their first one as a full studio. So that's the thing. Underneath the name Critical Hit Games, this is their first IP that they've done. And the publisher behind the game is actually PlayOn, which you may or may not know. They actually own a few different publishing units as well as some developing units. And some of those units are actually responsible for some, well, recognizable IPs, such as the St. Rose series. And actually, one of those developing and publishing units wasn't in early access or anything like that, 100% said and done. So, and I do think if for the potential side, if they decided to either do a DLC expansion in the future, I doubt it, but if they decided to, or if they decide to somehow play off a sequel or prequel of some kind for the game, I do think the potential is there. I think they had a pretty solid base with this one, and I think they could definitely continue off that, give it a couple years or something like that. I don't like to see sequels or prequels coming out every single year in a franchise. Give it a little bit to age, so to speak. And about technical difficulties and stuff like that, I never came across any kind of technical issues playing the game at all. So there were a few things with recording, but other than that, I actually didn't experience any kind of game breaking issues or anything that I can really think of. So it was in a pretty good, it was in a good state when I played it. Now on to section number four, graphics. The graphics for this game were top tier, honestly. They were very well done, and it is kind of be expected coming from the team of people that worked on this game, considering the fact that they came from working on AAA titles and everything. Yes, that doesn't mean a whole lot sometimes in this day and age, but still, they had some experience and whatnot. So they came into this pretty much knowing what they were doing when it came to that side, and I definitely gotta say they did very well from the first moment when I started playing the game, and even in like the opening scenes and everything, the part where your character James opens up the door in his car and looks down and everything, I just had a sense of awe when that moment happened. And then just throughout the entire game, the way everything looked, it was just very visual stunning. Like I very much enjoyed how it looked. So I never had any kind of visual glitches or anything like that or problems at all. They captured the aesthetic of the world very well with how they had all of the lighting, everything looking, but as well as how they had everything designed and whatnot, where it still felt like it was very like old classy kind of technology, but also very new and just how everything was kind of built and made to look. And I very much enjoyed that. Now, section five, gameplay. There's kind of a few things to talk about here, not a whole lot or such, just kind of a few pointers. Is probably one of the longer sections I have. The game was very simplistic in the overall gameplay. Several of the mechanics were very enjoyable, such as the key points when you're investigating a crime scene with the different tools and such. I did like how you had the different tools for each of those different things, and you had to use all of them to piece together clues and such. And then also at the key points at the investigation board and whatnot, and trying to piece all those things together reminded me a lot of the investigation board in uh, Shadows of Doubt. And I kind of actually liked how that felt very similar to that. There were a few times during the gameplay where I felt slightly lost, but that was just kind of me. And that is kind of how these games are meant to go. They're supposed to be puzzling, they're not supposed to be a cakewalk all the time. At least that's the way I kind of view these games. Um, when it comes to games that have like puzzles and stuff like that in them, they're not supposed to be so clean cut. So, but it did feel at certain times that the characters were doing a lot of hand holding with James, or the developers made the characters do that when it didn't quite seem necessary. Like at certain points where Sarah would say, "Oh, use this or use that." Yes, they did work that into the dialogue as her just trying to be helpful, so to speak, or trying to learn. But even then, still, it's like it felt like, "Oh, hey, nudge, nudge. Here's a hint. Use this and everything," even though you've already done it probably a dozen times by then. That was about the only thing that just kind of felt a little off by it. It's like, well, if you're gonna offer more help than like actual help, it would be useful in these other areas. But again, you can kind of take that with a grain of salt. I don't really think that takes away from anything. It just kind of felt like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, you're telling me to use this. I already have it in my hand and I'm ready to use it. And you're telling me now to use it. Okay. But again, it's not really anything to write home about or cry over spilt milk. So it really wasn't too bad. One thing about the game's reconstruct tool, though, that I gotta say, throughout the entire game, I kept things like, okay, I know this feature is in something. I've seen this feature in other games before. It's not like brand stinking new. And there was one particular game. It's like, okay, what game have I played where you completely rebuild stuff and whatnot? And it actually finally dawned on me after finishing the game and when I was sitting down to write this review and everything. It reminded me of the Red Faction Armageddon reconstruct tool that you use, where at certain points in that game, you can use it to reconstruct certain environments that you've destroyed and such. There are also a few other games that use very similar, like detective tools and whatnot, that this game also has. So I did now point or section number 6, sound design. The sound design was fantastic in this game, at least on my end. Yes, there was a few weird glitches, but that was OBS having a little bit of a brain fart at times. So that wasn't the actual game. Throughout the entire game experience, all the audio was fantastic. Everything from the music scores to the sound effects and the voice acting were very well done. The only gripe that I have with the audio, and this is probably my biggest gripe that I've actually been able to pick out in the entire game that I have, is at certain key moments, I guess you could say, the voice acting seemed a little off. Not like terrible, but just off. Either the tone of the voice of an actor at a certain point just seemed not quite right for the situation, or the volume of some voice lines actually felt inaccurate for the scene. So some examples of that is when James was talking to Sarah at a few points. I think it was somewhere in the middle of the game. One of James' lines just sounded way quieter than all the rest. Like not like he was trying to whisper or anything like that. I think it was actually in a moment when he was kind of being very vocal about something, and all of a sudden it's like like for a second I thought like my computer audio was turned down. Like it was just quiet all of a sudden. I don't know if that could have been an audio glitch on my end or not. I never went back to see if it was that or not, or if it was just the way it was. So that's like the only thing I know is just like, it actually made me think. It got really quiet for a second. And the other thing with like the kind of off voice acting, or it's like that wasn't quite the right tone. The moments in the game when he's hallucinating and he's at the beach and you're trying to go up to the beach to Rachel, the moments when he gets close, he reaches out in the final moments before he is pulled away, where he says, Rachel. Rachel! Yeah, it didn't quite seem right and everything. Like it worked, but all the rest of the game was very well done with the voice acting. Like there were multiple points and whatnot. The conversation between all the different characters and everything felt very human. Like it was relatable. It's like that, huh, that's actually some of the same jabs that I make it my coworkers and stuff like that, or even how my wife and I get each other a few times. So it felt very human in all that manner. But then just at a couple key points, it's like all of a sudden it just wasn't there. Understandably, though, voice actors have a lot of things that they got to go through too and whatnot. It'd be strenuous on the voice. Maybe they just want to get that voice line recorded and be done. So it's understandable. Again, not really anything to write home about or cry over, but it was just something that I noticed. It just kind of felt a little off. So that's all I got for that. Now on to section number 7, controls. There's not a lot to really talk about here. The controls were very simplistic, and I actually appreciated that about this game. I've played a lot of different games. Some had very confusing controls just overall, or some had very good controls, no need to rebind or do anything special. So this one, they were very simplistic. I just had to tweak a few things when it came to sensitivities, but that was about it. I did play on PC, but I did use my controller when I was playing the game, and it just felt more natural. I don't know why. It just felt really good to play it with the controller. So using the controller, it did take a little bit to get used to at the beginning, just for a hot second. I've been playing a lot of other third-person shooters and cover shooters and stuff like that recently, so switching back to a first-person perspective was a little bit different, but I got there in the end. So, but after the first hour, it felt very pleasant using the controller for this experience. So, really, not too much to be said on that matter. Now on to section number 8, which is the story and the lore of, well, the game. So the story is where this game really shines. That's like the one of the better things, along with the graphics, about the game. But there were a couple moments that I wasn't sure about, and I'll elaborate more in a second. But some of the greater things and everything, as I mentioned before, with the story and especially the characters and the dialogue, it felt very natural most of the time, like 95% of the time. It just felt very compelling. There's actually multiple points throughout the game that I was actually thinking to myself, what would I do in this situation? Like the story was actually compelling enough where I was questioning that. It wasn't like straight up obvious, I'm going to do this kind of thing. Like in a lot of story driven games, like this is the obvious answer and everything. But at points, it's like, well, would you really go this far to be with the person you love? Or this or that? You had all the couple different characters having different goals or reasons, motives for what they were doing and everything, and their standpoints on certain moral compass deals. So it was just interesting to the game actually made me question that a few times, like, like in this particular situation, put yourself in their shoes. What would you do? So they actually made me question that. So pretty good story there for me. Not too many story driven games do that to me. So the fact that they did was pretty good. The plot did keep me guessing quite a bit, actually. I wasn't entirely sure who the bad guy was that throughout most of the game. It's like, well, it's this or that. Who's like, there's a killer, but you just start wondering, well, literally anybody could be it. So, and the way they went was interesting. I wasn't expecting that. I was kind of expecting it to be a pretty clean cut. Oh, just this person's going around murdering people and he's tech savvy enough to erase any evidence and whatnot. But then they actually go into the whole thing. It's like, oh, well, that was not something I was expecting. So they definitely threw a curveball at me, which was pretty good. I'd probably say the thing about the story is that it felt like they were trying to do too much for how short the game was. But just a little bit. Like it wasn't bad, but it just felt like they were trying to stuff a lot of things into that playtime and into the plot and everything that just felt like it might not have needed to be like that. If the game was slightly longer where they could elaborate on a few more things, it felt good. Some key points is mainly where they had a lot of different characters they were throwing in and they're saying things and whatnot. It's like, oh, well, it's this person and whatnot. And they give a little bit of backstory on it. That's kind of a two-sided coin for me, because on one side it's either, well, you don't have all the time and everything to explain all of it. Sure, in a game you could maybe explain it just a little bit more, take a little bit more time to explain more stuff around the world essentially. But at the same time, on the other side of that coin, by doing it the way they did, where it's like all packed in everything, and they just kept the characters and the story just kept going and whatnot very fluently with all these different characters. Oh, Miller, oh, these and that, Green, all these different characters and whatnot. At that point, it felt like the world was actually like lived in. That's kind of one thing that storytelling can help with when it comes to, well, telling a story and such, is where the characters and everything, the world already existed and whatnot. Now, yes, it is pretty helpful to viewers or people who are enjoying the experience and everything, players, viewers, whatever it may be. It would be kind of helpful to maybe explain a little bit more so that way we as the player slash viewer know a little bit more about the world, maybe. But it at the same time, again, the way how everything was going down, it felt like the world was actually lived in. All the characters were intertwined and stuff like that. They knew each other, or they knew names and stuff like that. Even though we didn't, the characters did. And that's kind of one thing that makes the world feel slightly lived in, especially since that's actually pretty similar to how real life works for a lot of us and everything, is where there's a lot of people and everything. And surprisingly, it's not that big of a world. Like, I've met people and they all of a sudden, oh, you know this individual from your area? It's like, yeah, I do. How do you know him? And stuff like that. So that kind of thing is pretty realistic and whatnot, and it does kind of make the world feel slightly more lived in. So that's kind of where it's a toss up on that for me. It just kind of felt a little off, like they were trying to cram a lot of different. Oh, well, this guy's doing this guy's doing that. Like there's the CI and stuff like that, and all these other kind of things going on. It's like, why was he there and such? So all of that just didn't quite feel necessary, but it was also a thing you could probably just write off and continue down the main story too. So, take that as you will, I guess. And then the last thing about this section is the lore of the world. It was very intriguing and whatnot, hearing about all the different places and stuff like that. I would love to know more about this particular sci-fi world that they have built. And if I'm being honest, that's kind of where I'm hoping for some potential with the game slash potential franchise or something. Maybe. Just saying, throwing it out there. I would be very interested in seeing what they decide to do, if they decide to do anything more with it at all. So it is an interesting one for sure. Now, on to section number 9, which is the replay value of the game. A lot of games have it, a lot of games don't. This one definitely does have replay value in the game. So, unlike a lot of other story driven games, this one has multiple endings and multiple dialogue choices that players can choose from. And with the game only being 5 hours long, that's actually not too bad. It means you can easily go back and do another, sit down and playthrough of it relatively easily to experience a whole other dynamic of the game, possibly. It's definitely not on the same level as Detroit Become Human or Heavy Rain, where you got like, what, a couple dozen different potential endings and stuff like that, where each character has their own stuff. Definitely not that, I guess, elaborate on endings and such. There's just a couple different ones that you can try to get, as well as like different dialogue lines and such that you can experience. So, but going back to replay, I mean, another 5 hours. I mean, I beat the game in 4 hours and 40 minutes ish, I think, or somewhere around there, like just shy of 5 hours. And that was just on a pretty casual playthrough. I wasn't trying to see everything, but I also wasn't trying to speed run it, I guess you'd say. So I feel like it would not be hard to just sit down and see what a. All right, now section 10, price. And we talk about this with every single game. I'm going to bring up my same point, as I always do. So the price of this game specifically, I feel like it's reasonable. Sure, the fact that you can beat the game in a single playthrough in a one sitting does seem a bit short, but we've done that with other story games and stuff like that for decades now. So it's not exactly new to sit down and beat a game. I mean, heck, if I remember right, you could probably sit down and play any of the Halo games and probably a couple of the newer Call of Duty game campaigns pretty quickly. And those games are probably what, quadruple the price? So take that with a grain of salt if you want. But my main point when it comes to games and everything, again, as I always say, everyone puts their own price of what they'll pay for entertainment. People will spend hundreds, if not, maybe in some cases, thousands of dollars to get a ticket to go to a concert or a Comic Con of some kind and whatnot. And you're being entertained for how many hours exactly? And then you're going to be stingy about 25, 30, or whatever dollars for a 5 hour game for a single playthrough. Yeah, I mean, again, take it with a grain of salt. That's the way I always view these kind of things with games, is where it's about the individual and what you're expecting to get out of the experience. So was it worth the 20 some dollars, the 100 some dollars, the thousands of dollars or whatever for that experience? That's where the question really boils down to. Not a dollar per hour played or whatever. I normally don't like that whole mindset very much because I've spent hardly anything on some games, or I've spent hundreds of dollars on some games, and I've gotten thousands of hours of enjoyment out of them. So it really just depends on the person. So, but for me personally, the price, I would buy the game again at full price. If you can pick it up for sale, that is always better. But I would still buy it again if you want my opinion on it. But that's just me. So now the final section of every single review, how many iron bars am I giving this game? And yes, if this is your first time here, we measure it in iron bars because puns. I'm a dad. So duh? I don't know. So with everything that I've experienced with the game so far, I would give the game an 8 out of 10 pretty easily. Everything was very, very good for a brand new IP from a brand new studio that had some veterans of the industry in it. It felt very good for that. So it was very slick, essentially, beyond the audio things. That was it. Again, probably some of the just takeaway things that I have was, again, the audio just felt off at a few points, and it felt like they were trying to cram a lot of stuff into the game for the time that we had to play it. But again, as discussed, I'll recap back to it. Maybe that could even be unraveled by playing it more. I mean, we've watched confusing movies and stuff like that before, right? And after what, where some of us need to watch it a second or third time before something actually clicks. And the more you watch it or play it, the more certain things make sense. So that's where, obviously, if things are a little confusing, I'm probably going to sit down and do another playthrough off stream just to kind of see, maybe I'll end up catching something. Because that's one thing. You can't expect to see everything in certain games, especially this, if they try to make it complicated and went out with puzzles or dialogue and all these different plot lines in these kind of ones. Sometimes you have to play it back a second or maybe third time before you actually see all the different little nooks and crannies of what's going on and such. So that's kind of why I'm sitting here. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, it felt like there was a lot crammed into it, but it's like, it's not that hard to go back and play the game. And when you do that, you'll probably see a new perspective. Because again, that's happened multiple times with movies. All right. You can't deny that you didn't watch a movie and you were a little lost on the plot. And then you had to go back and watch it maybe a second, maybe a third, fourth, or fifth, or sixth, or however, 10th, to finally get, it's like, oh, yeah, that's what happened there. So that's kind of where, even though it felt like they were trying to cram a lot into it, it felt pretty good for what it is. So, but there you guys go. I definitely enjoyed my time. Felt like it was a great experience. Probably going to play through again off stream and off camera just to kind of see what other angles there is. But otherwise, if you haven't picked up the game yet, and if you love these kind of games and everything, story and the aesthetic and everything, I definitely recommend it. So it's an experience. Well, that's going to be it for today, everybody. So I hope you guys enjoyed the playthrough and the review as much as I did recording it for you guys. And I'll see you for next Indie Sunday. All right. Keep it classy.